All right. Hi, everyone. I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining the session to talk with Notion today about some of her experience and expertise. Just to start out and get into it, I'll pass it over to you, Notion, to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Amani. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the session today. I'm really excited to be here. My job title is I'm the policy coordinator for Young Invincibles. It's a national nonprofit, but we also have regional chapters. So I am the policy coordinator for the New York Young Invincibles chapter. I got my MSW from Columbia in 2020, specializing in public policy. And while I was getting my master's, I actually was the student advocacy organizer for Student Advocacy Day for CRISP in 2020. So it's really great to be back here as a speaker as well. I got my bachelor's in social work from Stony Brook in 2020 as well. So I got 2 degrees in a year, which was pretty cool. Helps when you get your bachelor's in social work. Some of the policies that I work on, I work at the New York State and New York City level. I work on policies related to affordable and accessible higher education, affordable and accessible healthcare for young adults, and expanding workforce development for our young adults in New York State as well. So that is sort of my background, and I'll give it back to you, Amani.
Thank you, Notion, for sharing that. And I do want to say that we'll have some time for question and answer towards the end of the session, but if you have any questions throughout, go ahead and put them in the chat. And so just to start off, Notion, can you tell us a little bit about your path to working on the Hill and also in your position that you're in now?
Yeah, so I have always been interested in public policy. So when I got my bachelor's in social work, I actually advocated within my social work program to get an internship during my second year with a legislator or in local government because, as you guys might know here, social work is predominantly clinical. But I knew from the beginning that I wanted to go into the macro level, policy level social work field. So my first internship as a social worker was with Legislator Kara Hahn. She's a local elected official in Suffolk County, and she's also a social worker. So that was where I really got a lot of exposure and experience into the role that social workers can play in policy and in the political world. After that, when I got my master's, I was actually interning at CRISP, where I organized Student Advocacy Day. But through my internship, I got a lot of experience with meeting Congress folks, Congress members, setting up meetings with our staffers, and actually creating congressional briefings on different issues. So while I was at CRISP, I was doing literature reviews and writing congressional briefings on the issue of the role of police officers in schools and how we should be investing in less police officers in schools and more investment into full-time mental health counselors, social workers, and more support services. So that was sort of the work I did at CRISP. After graduating, I got a job with another nonprofit at Rise Magazine, where I was their policy coordinator. And this was a really interesting position because I was a social worker working for an abolitionist organization, and they were fairly new into the advocacy space. I was also a recent graduate and a social worker, and a lot of folks, even when interviewing for jobs, they were like, "You're a social worker, but you're interviewing for public policy positions and a policy coordinator position. What's the connection here?" And that's when I really realized, like, I really have to define the connection between social workers understanding the individual needs of people and then connecting these individual needs that we see out in the field and connecting it to the larger policies that are impacting folks on the day-to-day basis. And that's really how I got like my first policy coordinator job with Rise, which is also an abolition organization addressing the problems within the child welfare system or the language that they use with the family policing system, and how can we invest in community supports and in parents that are being investigated by the child welfare system rather than going through intrusive investigations with CPS. From there is where I joined Young Invincibles. And social workers are so needed when it comes to advocating for a lot of the policies that I'm working in right now. One thing that I'm sure everyone here has realized is that our basic needs when you're going through education are really not met. a lot of your peers or classmates are probably going through housing insecurity, food insecurity. There's a huge lack of mental health counselors for students in grad and undergrad schools. These are basic needs that are not being met. And if us as social workers are recognizing this in our educational spaces, but we're not doing anything to address it on the policy level, then we're really leaving a lot of the power up to elected officials and leaving that gap. So that's when I realized, like, I'm a social worker. I see that our basic needs are not being met in educational institutions. Let me enter this policy sphere through this organization and start doing something about it.
Amazing. And you kind of talked a little bit about what it was like kind of making that kind of transition from where you started out in your education to where you are now in policy work and kind of making that connection. For anyone who's interested in working like on the Hill or in sort of advocacy work, the types of things that you've done, what should they know as they begin applying to those jobs and looking for those opportunities?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something, honestly, I struggled with when I was looking for jobs in the beginning too. I think what's really important is to draw a very clear connection within the skill set the social workers have and the need for having the skill set in the policy and political field. In my experience, when working with New York State senators and assembly members and with lobbyists in general, a lot of them don't really know how to talk to impacted folks on an individual basis. They may have this really amazing skill set to analyze policies and understand how this legislation is going to have a huge fiscal impact or how this resolution, is going to like address this lack of a task force or whatever. But what they really don't understand is how to bring people's real life issues, this ability to story tell into the world of policy. I think what our elected officials really lack is an understanding that these data numbers that they're looking at issues with need real life examples. And this is where us as social workers really have a strong skill set. We know how to talk to people on one-on-one. We know how to empathize strongly, and we know how to build a connection between our individual needs and systemic flaws or a need to improve the system. And that's really what I would emphasize for anyone looking for jobs in the policy field, is really emphasizing that we bring this really strong skill set that is apparently absent in the federal and in the state levels.
That's such a good point, and it's a good segue into my next question for you. In terms of, like you said, really emphasizing the skill set that you have as a social worker to bring into different fields. What are some skills that you think is important that you gained kind of as you started working more in advocacy work that you feel like is important for people to have and grow on if they want to continue doing that work?
Yeah, I would say my number one skill that I use a lot every day is very strong and clear communication. I have no idea if this is like like an official skill or not, but knowing how to communicate is so key. For example, I work on a multitude of issues. So right now I'm working on bills to expand tuition assistance to part-timers in higher education institutions. For a lot of the elected officials I'm working with, they understand the need for more financial aid, but they get bogged down in the weeds of, okay, but what does it mean for part-time students to get it? Why can't we just give it to full-time students and we'll find another source of, tuition assistance for part-timers, because money is always scarce apparently in New York, even though we're a big state and we have to advocate for it. The way I've gotten through with elected officials and making them understand why we need certain legislation passed is being very blunt, very clear, and drawing very clear lines on impact. And to do that, you have to be really good at communicating. And for me, that took a lot of improvement in making sure I stopped, saying please or being a bit more appeasing. With, generally in my nature, I really am more of like quiet, shy. I tend to let other folks speak and I'll speak up if I think something's wrong. But in this field, you really have to communicate, get ahead first, and make sure our voices are heard. Because if not, our elected officials will take that power back and do what they want, and then we'll be left in the dust like, well, we didn't get funding for anything we wanted. So knowing how to communicate and really just putting yourself out there. I'm telling you, everyone in Albany thinks they know everything, but the minute you start pulling out data, everyone will be quiet and listen to you, because they really do just talk to talk until someone comes in with knowledge. And I'm sure it's the same other places as well.
Absolutely. And in terms of all of the roles that you kind of described that you've done leading up to where you are now in your career, what do you feel like, which roles do you feel like were most beneficial to you and having an impact on social policy?
Yeah, I still rely on everything I've learned in my first internship while I was getting my bachelor's in social work with Legislator Kara Hahn. If you can get experience working with an elected official or working in government first, I think that will really break down this illusion of like policy is scary, politics is really difficult. I definitely don't have a space for it. Seeing what happens in the background, seeing the nitty-gritty conversations that elected officials have with each other, seeing how caucus meetings are run, how, not put together a lot of these offices are, no matter how they present themselves during committee hearings, it really helps to build confidence and understand that you really do have a huge role to play in entering policy in any field. If you're going as an advocate for nonprofits, if you're going as a staffer for an elected official, or if you're running for office yourself, and you just need that boost of confidence, I'm telling you, if you can get experience working in government and seeing what happens in the background, it really helps give you that boost of confidence and breaks down that illusion that like politics is a lot more difficult and harder than it really is, and you have to be an expert on everything. It really isn't true. And I don't think I would have had the confidence personally for me being, visibly Muslim, first gen immigrant, really didn't think I'd have a space for any of this anywhere. Doing my internship with Legislator Kara Hahn really showed me that yes, I do have a space here. I will definitely fit in. Like I know more than enough than these people to know that I can make a difference.
It's amazing. And speaking of your work with the legislator, um, one skill that we learn in our social work programs is to make change on a system and structural level. How has that skill appeared in your work with the legislator or any of your other work?
Yeah, so social workers really do know how to bring a system level perspective. The way I brought it to my work is a lot of the bills that I work on really does address system level change. And I'll speak on some of the bills that I'm working on if anyone here is from New York State or wants to work in New York State politics. Um, a bill that we're working on that I'm leading is actually mandating all SUNY, so State University, New York institutions and colleges, and our city CUNY, our City University of New York colleges that are publicly funded by New York State, we're mandating that all of these publicly funded colleges by New York State to hire a full-time support staff to support students experiencing homelessness in each campus. We know student homelessness is a real issue, but we also know that our public institutions don't have any sort of infrastructure that is dedicated in targeting students who are experiencing homelessness. And so what I'm working on is a very systems level approach that we see on the broader level. There's no funding or investment to implement infrastructure that can support students experiencing homelessness. So a lot of my policies are addressing the system level by recognizing there's no infrastructure in place. Let's put in a policy and let's get funding to put these infrastructures in place. Another example is, as I mentioned before, getting more funding for TAP or tuition assistance programs in New York State. To get more funding and money, you have to understand on the systems level, where is this money coming from? That means working with New York State, working within the New York State budget process, and exploring the budget, working with other partners and organizations and figuring out where are we pulling money from, where are we going to put money in to get more money for tuition assistance program. Almost everything policy level is probably going to be systems just because policy addresses system issues more often than not. Implementing legislation is a completely different issue, though. That's when you go into more administrative and on more programmatic basis. But policy really is systematic. And so that's why social workers really do fit in the policy field, because we understand how to connect that micro to macro connection.
That is a really good point, and I think another skill that you that we learned kind of as social workers, and also that you kind of talked about before, is just that value of communication and being able to communicate what you need and what you're asking for with like legislators and policy makers and others as well. So, what type of communications do you feel like are most frequent in work on the Hill or advocacy work in general?
Yeah, so when I got my master's, I had one course that taught me how to write policy memos. I did not realize I should have paid more attention in that class because a really effective way of communication with legislators, and this is based on my experience in New York State, so it really could be different for other states. But policy memos are such a effective way of communication and expressing support for a bill for elected officials. And the reason for this is because if you write a policy memo or a memorandum of support, they're usually the same thing. You can get partner organizations or individuals to sign onto this memo, and then you just send one piece of paper to the elected official that summarizes why this bill is important, the recommendation associated with this bill, the impact of this bill, and then you have a list of so many people supporting it. And that way, in one piece of paper, the elected officials, staffers, the legislative directors, whoever is looking at it, gets a very clear example of, oh, this is why we really should be focusing on this bill. Oh, my district really cares about this. Let's get work on it. It saves you so many emails. It saves you so many Zoom meetings. It saves you so many back and forth of like, this is the data, this is that. Policy memos are a really great effective tool. So if any of you guys, are taking a class on policy memo, or Columbia really has a specialization for public policy, which is why I was able to take that class. If you're in a program that offers it, I really do recommend it because it is a really great skill to have if you're going to enter this field.
That's great advice. And now I'm wishing I paid a little bit more attention in my policy memo class as well. But there is a quick question in the chat. And I do want to say, if you all want to come off mute at any time, if there's a immediate question that you have for Notion, something she said, then feel free to do that as well. But someone in the chat said, those are incredible causes you talked about, ending student homelessness and tuition assistance. How do you think students can get involved or engage with direct policy work? Or what kind of skills, in addition to effective communication, do you think are needed for this kind of work?
Yeah, Sadia, this is a really great question. So the organization I work with, Young Invincibles, we actually have a Young Advocates program where we train and empower young adults ages 18 to 34 to get involved in the political process. New York State has a lot of nonprofit organizations that are working on issues such as food insecurity in colleges, housing insecurity, mental health, advocating for more mental health support services in higher education. If you, most often than not, in my experience, a lot of nonprofits are eager to get folks involved, whether it's volunteering or doing an internship with them, or doing an action item with them, showing up at a rally that they're organizing. I've organized at least 3 rallies in my year with Young Invincibles, and one thing we always love and see and get more engaged with is when folks show up to our rallies, we reach out to them again and again. We build a relationship. If we have positions open, then we reach out to them first. If they joined our Young Advocates program, they're going to be the first people we reach out to with other action items or open positions. So showing up to events, volunteering is a really great way to introduce yourself to an organization and start getting engaged. And so many of like our issues are important, but we're so understaffed because we're nonprofits. That means that we're always going to be desperate for more people to show up and get extra hands for help. For your second question, what kind of skills, in addition to effective communication, do you think are needed for this kind of work? I've had to work on my budget analysis skill a lot. A lot of the social issues that I've worked on and I've seen in my career in the child welfare system and now in the higher education system is that we need funding for the issues and solutions that we're going to be advocating for. And that means knowing how to read a budget, especially government budgets, which are going to be bogged down with so many unnecessary words, and they're going to make it difficult for you to understand. Knowing how to analyze a budget and break it down and then reorganize that budget into how you want it to be is so important. And it's a skill that honestly, I don't think I'm so perfect at. And it's taken over a year for me to really understand. In my experience, the New York State budget is also really big. We have a $227 billion budget. It's one of the largest budgets in the country. When the governor releases her budget every year, it's like a month-long process of me and my team trying to break it down and understand how are we going to advocate for the funding we need and where we're going to say to take money out of. So budget analysis is also really important. Money is power. It does not matter what state you're in. Money is power. So understanding how to read money and dollars in your budget is going to be so critical.
And then I did want to bring attention to another question in the chat. Someone said, did you say that you did an internship at a politician's office? Was there someone to provide you with supervision there? My school requires us to have someone with an MSW on staff to supervise us.
Yeah, so I did internship with a elected official. So after she was elected into position, she was a legislator at Suffolk County. Her name is Kara Hahn. I think she also ran for Congress after I left. In New York State, she was in Long Island. Even though she was a social worker, she was not my supervisor. I had to really advocate within my program, and my professors were really helpful in this process to like when I advocated for a macro level internship, they accommodated. And even though my social work supervisor wasn't on the field with me, because there's no social worker who is legally allowed to supervise me while I'm out on the field with elected official, I would come back, and during school hours, I would have another one-on-one session with a social worker, with a professor who was licensed and legally allowed to supervise me. So I would tell her about the tasks I'm doing, and she would oversee the tasks and make sure it aligned with Stony Brook's curriculum. That's really how they accommodated for me. And I would really encourage everyone here, if your school doesn't really have a program or a support in place for your macro level interest, more often than not, they will be encouraging and help you adapt or find a way to get you into that macro level internship. And Brianna, you could totally connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can definitely answer questions if it's helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, continue putting questions in the chat. I'll make sure we get to as many as possible. I did want to ask you another question, Noshin, kind of speaking on your social work education. Social work is deeply rooted in its values and ethics. So how did working on the Hill or working with that legislator support those values that you hold and social work values as well?
You know, I'm gonna have to think back to the search. I know one of the values that's always stuck with me from my BSW and MSW has been elevating and ensuring that the dignity of all individuals is uplifted and ensured. And that really influences my basic needs work that I do in higher education, because the fact is higher education institutions will have these wonderful mission statements that say we support our students, we're here to make sure your academic journey is holistic and as valuable as it can be while you're giving us your hard-earned tuition dollars and money, but they don't support our basic needs. Administration will always fail to recognize how and when to support our basic needs. And as a social worker, I'm advocating for them to see us as who we are and not just students who they can take our tuition money from and who they can put tuition hikes on without realizing that our money literally has not supported our mental health. We have so many peers and students who are living sofa to sofa or from one house to another, from one friend's house to another without a real stable housing place, because affordable housing does not exist in the higher education sphere. And dorming can always be expensive, and it should not be the only option that schools offer. So really just making sure that the dignity of all of our students and folks who want to have a post-secondary degree, like these higher education institutions, are meeting our basic needs and doing the bare minimum to meet our basic needs.
I think we can all agree with that. Also, you kind of talked about it a little bit in that answer, but how did your work on the Hill or some of the work that you're doing now, how has it challenged your values over time?
Yeah, I think I love being a social worker, and one of the things I do is I always introduce myself as a social worker to any elected official, any staffer I meet, because I want social work to take up space in the policy field. But I understand, in my opinion, social work has predominantly, from what I've been taught by a white supremacist framework. I didn't see a lot of my education reflect me or any cultural competent, like any sort of history that didn't revolve around Jane Addams or, a white framework of how to save communities that are impacted. It was a very white savior framework. So as a social worker, I always feel conflicted because I love being a social worker, but I also know how problematic this field is and can be. In the policy field, to be honest, I feel like as of now, like social workers are like still like reaching this policy field. Like we have amazing social workers who are staffers, but New York State has like 2, 3 social workers max who are elected, and these are old generation social workers. I know the newer generation is challenging our education and making sure we're not learning from a white savior framework. But I also know that the older generation isn't and hasn't been learning in that space as well. So as much as I want to support social workers in office, I want to make sure that those social workers who are in office are also practicing from a anti-racist, equitable framework instead of the white savior framework a lot of us have been taught, me included. I've had to challenge and unlearn a lot of the things I learned in class to take that anti-racist framework. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another question in the chat, real quick. Zahira said, my nonprofit provides basic needs to college students locally to enhance their self-actualization and academic success. I would love to know what we are doing micro that can mirror your macro work.
And yeah, so the one thing that we're doing right now to support basic needs, especially in terms of housing, is mandating all SUNY and CUNY campuses to hire a full-time staffer that's only designated role is support students who are experiencing homelessness. On the micro level, the way we got to this solution is because in New York City, there was actually a pilot program done by a nonprofit who actually got private donation of about I want to say $50,000, and they rented out an apartment in Queens, gave rooms to 36 students, and also had a social worker on site within that apartment that provided wraparound services, so mental health support, housing support, food pantry support, any support that that social worker could provide to the students living in that apartment. That pilot program really showed us that if we gave affordable housing to these students, and if we gave them a social worker on site that gave them wraparound services, their academic performance skyrocketed. Having a stable place to stay and knowing where your next meal is coming from has a direct impact on how well you're going to be doing academically. And that pilot program influenced this bill because it showed us if CUNY and SUNY campuses could hire a full-time person to provide these services, where we know we're going to be supporting all students and not just, students who are able to get into this pilot program, which is amazing, but private funding isn't sustainable. Government funding is a lot more sustainable. So this bill was influenced directly from the micro work that this pilot program and the social work is doing on the ground.
And then kind of, again, speaking on that, it's kind of like important for us as individuals to be able to get involved with like advocacy work, advocating for ourselves and for communities. But what are some examples of advocacy that you've received from like constituents when you're working with a legislator, or from communities that you've seen that you feel like has been most effective?
The most effective form of advocacy, especially as if you are someone who's impacted or someone who's really passionate about the social issues you're working on, is showing up for testimonies, public testimonies during committee hearings. Any chance there is for you to go in front of elected officials and testify and speak on an issue is really going to make a huge difference. I've seen in front of my eyes like elected officials who are really hesitant about voting yes on a bill change their mind when us as organizers and community members showed up in force to testimonies and to public hearings and said, you're going to vote yes now because you're going to face a lot of repercussions if you don't support the bill that we're saying you should support. That is one of the best ways to advocate. Also showing up to rallies. Just recently, Young Invincibles did a rally in front of the Supreme Court on February. I mean, we had so much of an impact because so many students and young adults showed out to this SCOTUS rally. That makes a huge difference because you get more press conference when people show up in big crowds and speak on an issue. The more media hits, the more elected officials want to get in on this issue. We had an elected official who was not scheduled to speak at this rally come in and say, I need to speak. If I don't speak now, everyone's going to know I didn't support this issue. I mean, sometimes that's just the way it's going to work. And that's the reality of this world, is that, especially in this policy world, is you make more noise, people want to be part of this noise and show that they're leaders in this too. And if that means elected officials are going to start voting yes on it, then so be it, because that policy will get passed. So showing up, even if it means being an extra body to this rally or testimony, show up. It really does make a difference.
I think that that's great advice. And I think that also there's been times where some of us may have tried to get involved with advocacy work or make our voices heard in some sort of way and felt like it didn't have as much of an impact as we wanted it to. Are there any examples you have of advocacy strategies that you feel like are more ineffective?
This is going to be like controversial because I believe there's value in it, but I also don't know if there's value in it. And I'm going to say signing petitions. And it's different from signing onto policy memos. And I'm not saying petitions are ineffective, because when done right, and depending on who you choose to target with that petition, it could genuinely be really effective. But more often than not, petitions are targeting the wrong person. They might not have the right target. Like, you might just choose, in my case, in New York State, Governor Hochul as your target. But the person who has a lot of authority actually might be your municipal district or your city. Like in this case, New York City Mayor Adams might have had more authority, but you chose Governor Hochul, and now you have like 7,000 signatures, but you're sending it to the wrong office, and they're just going to shrug it aside because we're all overworked beyond capacity. So why are we going to take on an issue that we don't really have power on? Along with that, I think petitions often have a very short message, and it's a good and quick call to action. I genuinely, as an organizer, I understand giving an action item at a rally or giving something folks to do so they feel like they made a difference is so important. It's a really great tactic to build an engagement in movement. If you give someone something to do, you're building that relationship in that movement and you're expanding your base. As an organizer, I really do understand that. But petitions are so tricky, and oftentimes more than not, it is ineffective because you can have 7,000 signatures, but they might have already made their decision, so it's tricky. And I'm an organizer, so I know we rely on petitions a lot, but I also really feel like it's overused and not the best tactic.
That's such an interesting answer, because I think, like you said, that is kind of like an ask that you see at from a lot of people that are organizing for an issue. But that's a great point, that sometimes it's not directed to the right people, or just not done, I guess, with enough thought behind it to have it be as effective as you might want it to be. And I just want to emphasize that if anyone has a question for Noshin, go ahead and put it in the chat, or if you want to come off mute at any time, you're free to do that.
I have a question. One space that macro space that I'm also interested in getting into is research. So I wanted to go back to this example that you gave about that pilot program. How were you able to gather the data on the impact of that program? And I guess what sort of data is most effective when you're speaking to these representatives?
Yeah, so our organization worked with the other nonprofit, and you can actually look this up. It's the Neighborhood Coalition Shelter Pilot Program in New York City, if you're interested in looking into it more. We worked with their office. They pulled out their data, but what we did in our capacity is we also released our own report, and we hosted focus groups with college students, CUNY college students across New York City. And within these focus groups, we asked them, are you experiencing homelessness? 65% of them said yes, they are experiencing some type of homelessness. They might not be out on the streets, but they also don't have a permanent residence or any place to go. We asked them questions like, how has you not having a stable place to stay redefined your definition of success? How has your professor or your academic advisor or them supported you, if they have supported you? We've asked them what resources have they looked into that's being offered, for affordable housing. We sort of asked like a very holistic range of questions, and we created our own report based off of our focus groups with our young adults. By the way, all of our young adults were paid. We do not believe in unpaid volunteer work. We work for free as enough as it is. So all of these were paid, and I genuinely highly recommend, if you guys are ever in any positions of power, this is such a side note, but always try to pay your volunteers if you can. Okay, going back to what I talked about. We took this report, finalized their data, and I'm not gonna lie, this feels like 2 years ago, so I don't have the data on the top of my head, but we took this data and literally did literature drops. Like, we took these reports and dropped them in the mailboxes of all the elected officials up in Albany. Then we did a whole email blast individual. So like, we individually catered our emails to every elected official with this report, highlighted our recommendations that came out of this data, and showed them, 65% of CUNY students are homeless. We can't even imagine what it is like New York State. And this was like peak pandemic, right before the pandemic as well. So we know that the numbers are way more exacerbated now. You take this data, you shove it in their face, but we also couple this data with stories, because we really don't believe in just shoving numbers, because then they don't really understand the reality of what's happening on the ground. So we took young adult stories and quotes from that focus group and coupled it with data and just shoved it in their face. We did everything we could to show them, you need to pay attention to this report. Logistically, it takes a lot of capacity and operational, like, you have to be organized, you have to be like strategic about your messaging, because some elected officials do not like you being up in their face, and sometimes they might be the chair of the higher education committee, so you have to cater to how they like being told stuff. But be strategic about it, but put the numbers in their face however much you can.
And a follow up kind of to that, I know it's important, kind of like you talked about in the work that you do, is just amplifying the voice of the community sometimes, like you said, really involving those personal stories when you're trying to get a point across. So how do you go about, you and your team, how do you go about finding the right voices to amplify in the community and really making sure that the community is kind of at the forefront of the issues that you're advocating for?
So we don't pick and choose the stories we're going to tell. We believe all of our young adults are very right in their own spaces. So when our young adults come and share a story about something they're going through and it connects to one of the policy issues we're working on, we have a storyteller coordinator in our organization. They work with them to help them process what they're saying, because sometimes it could be traumatic, so you don't want them to like relive their trauma unnecessarily. So we have someone to help them process this story. We ask them certain questions to get the details out, but we are accountable to the young adults we serve. It's really not the other way around. I feel very accountable to all those who are impacted on the issues I'm working on. So if I'm working on student housing insecurity, I'm accountable to the community I'm reaching out to. And that means I'm not going to be telling them how to share their story and when to share their story. I make sure they're as comfortable as they can be, and they share their story how they want and when they want to share it. Sometimes a lot of our young adults will share stories and write up interviews for us, but they'll tell us, I'm not comfortable with this going public yet. And so we'll keep that in mind, and we'll just put it in a bank and never touch it until they reach out to us saying, I want to write an op-ed and I want to do like a media or press conference about this. And then we'll be like, okay, if you're ready, we'll do this. So honestly, I feel like I forgot the original question, but always remember to be accountable to the folks who are impacted, and make sure those who are impacted are leading the movement. As a social worker, we might know the technicalities of issues and social issues and theories and all of the good stuff, but it means nothing compared to the folks that like lived through the issues. So make sure they're leading the movement and they're being centered, and we're just being there to give the tools to support them, whether it's micro or macro.
That is very refreshing to hear. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bernice.
Sorry, I have a question. So, is political advocacy a young person's game? Because from what I'm hearing, I know Young Invincible, they have a program, they train you from 18 to 34. But what advice would you give to someone who's starting off later they're doing their MSW, and so they're starting a little later in life. Like, what advice would you give to them if they want to enter that arena in terms of political advocacy?
I would give you the same exact advice I would give any young adults, which is just put your face out there and get involved. We just specifically do 18 to 34 because that's what our organization's mission is. But when I was working at RISE in the child welfare system, I was working with parents who were impacted by that family policing system. And my job there was to teach them and train them how to give testimonies, how to understand the government in New York State and New York City, who has power over what. I trained them on the logistical and technicality parts of New York State because the governor oversees the budget, but the city council, the state senate and assembly members see this part of, government or whatever. It does not matter what age you get involved in, just our social issues need people. We need social workers. Just, show up at testimony, show up at rallies, get engaged. There are going to be programs available for everyone at all ages. Off the top of my head, do I know any program? No, but I'm fairly confident that there are programs to help you. And if you're a social worker, to be honest, you have all the skills you need through our education. Just go out there and get involved, whether you want to be involved through a nonprofit or be a staffer or run for office yourself.
That was a great question, Bernice. Thank you for that. And then there are a few more questions in the chat that I want to go to. So how do you think, especially being a visible Muslim woman of color, are you informing the work you do with your personal experiences or values?
My identity really drives the work that I do. In New York State specifically, you will barely see a hijabi or visibly Muslim woman like running around in Albany in the Capitol working with legislators. That has been my experience. That's really just personally my experience. But it makes me a lot more passionate, and it really emboldens me to speak out more when I'm in meetings, when I'm in coalition meetings, because I know that if I'm not speaking out, then I'm sort of fulfilling the stereotype that like Muslim women are more quiet or shy. That's just a stereotype I've heard. I don't know if it's like true or not. Not that it's true, but I don't know if that's like a more largely known, but that's what I've grown up in New York City. So it really does give me more confidence to speak up. And honestly, like, it doesn't matter even if like I'm just visibly Muslim. For anyone who's BIPOC or minority, like, you guys have so much space that you should just take up in these spaces, because people who know nothing get elected into office. It's not just at the federal level. At the state level, there's so many folks who just won because no one else ran for that seat. So I'm working with some elected officials who have no expertise, no background or experience like out on the field with these issues. They simply won because they had no one else run against them. And so I know as like woman, as like a BIPOC, POC person, like we're made to feel like we shouldn't speak up. It's not our space. Like, as someone who's first gen also, I'm like, I should just be grateful I'm in this country because that's the vibes that my parents have always given. Like, you should just be glad like we're in this country. Don't try to like yell with the white people. But really, we know what we're doing. Take up space, argue with them, confront them. You have more expertise than you think you do.
And have you felt, so many questions coming through. Have you felt your voice or the voices of the people you're advocating for are valued or challenged in spaces where you might have been or presented as a minority? And in what ways do you feel supported or empowered?
Challenged 100%. I noticed very early on that compared to my supervisor director who is white, when he presents data, he doesn't get questioned. They take his words face value. But when I present data or I'm making a connection between something someone has said and a data that I know is true, they ask me to, paste the source in the chat or follow up with the report. And that's something I've seen very visibly only done to me. So I know that my voice has been challenged, but I also know that I'm not speaking out of like thin air. And so I'm confident that it doesn't matter what they're doing. I know what I'm saying and I have things to back it up. But that is the reality that I've been faced with. But how I've been supported, I mean, my supervisor, I surround myself with folks who understand that I am being treated differently, but I get that affirmation, I get that validation that I need, because I'm also someone, who thrives off of like getting reassurance that what I'm doing is good. And I have built a support system that gives me what I need so that I don't get burnt out and I still feel energetic about doing the work that I do. And also, since something that I'm really proud of is since I've taken on this position, I've brought in more, Bengali and Muslim girls into this field in New York State, and they're doing testimonies now. On March 16th, like I have so many, POC women coming up with me in Albany and, doing these advocacy sessions and legislative sessions together. 3 years ago, if you look at our cohort, it would be like not as diverse as it is now. So I also see that difference in impact. And I see Pilar, you asked, who should New York City MSW students reach out to? I am not familiar with like the folks in the social work, like licensing area, or like how many hours should that be? So I'm so sorry, I'm not the right person to ask for that.
And then Anna asked, or I'm considering looking for work in Albany. Where do you think I should look for applicable jobs in the capital for an MSW?
That is a really great question. If you're interested in a fellowship, you have the Empire State Fellowship that teaches you how to 6-month internship with like a 40,000 salary. If you don't want to do a fellowship after you graduate, I really recommend searching keywords such as policy analyst, policy coordinator, legislative director, like those keywords. Don't put social worker in the jobs you're searching for, because you won't get policy jobs. You'll get like clinical and caseworker jobs, which is fine. But if that's not what you're looking for, don't put social worker. Put keywords such as public policy analyst, policy coordinator, legislative director. Those types of keywords will get you the jobs that you're looking for in Albany or in New York City. And I'm fairly confident that this is applicable even to jobs outside of New York. Like in general, if you're an MSW and you're looking for this kind of a job, this is the kind of keywords you should be putting in to get that type of a job.
That's such a good question. Thank you for that, Anna. And then as we're coming down towards the end of the session, I do want to encourage you guys, if you have more questions for Noshin, make sure to put them in the chat or come off mute so you can get your question answered. But I also wanted to ask, how do you motivate yourself when the work gets hard or demoralizing?
I take a break from work when my work gets demoralizing. That's how I keep myself motivated. It is really hard to stay in that space that's burning you out, so I take a break. Also, my organization is really wonderful. We have mental health Mondays. So like Mondays, we just like once a month we'll get like Mondays off. We have summer Fridays. We also have just a lot of like days where you can just take off and you don't have to like log it in as like paid time off or like sick time or anything like that. Find an organization that's willing to care about your mental health is really important. I know in the nonprofit space it can be difficult, but also just step away from the space, like if you can, it is a privilege. I totally recognize that. But if you can, just leave that environment that's draining your energy and just take a break from it. When I started this job and like I was talking to like folks who were in the field, they would say, reframe your work or find a different way to approach it. Don't do that. Just walk away from it. That's honestly the best.
That's great advice. I think especially in terms of social work, the culture can kind of be that you have to work yourself until you're burnt out and that you should keep going. And with advocacy work as well, it's kind of hard to take a step away from it. So that's great advice. So I also wanted to kind of, as a more wrapping up question for your session, do you have any more sort of like general advice for anyone who's interested in getting involved with the work that you do specifically, but also working with elected officials as well?
I would say, working in this field, my first advice is don't feel like you have to be an expert. I'm not saying come in clueless, but don't feel like you're not qualified to do anything because you're not an expert. That's why different agencies and different organizations exist. Just understand the issue you're working on and come in with good intentions, but know that you can learn on the job as well. This might sound really bad, but I mean it. Don't think you have to be an expert to apply for a job or work with elected officials on a certain issue. That's what Google is for. That's what research is for. That's what partner organizations and coalitions are for. What matters is your voice and your framework of thinking that you're coming in with. That's really important. Your experience and your intentions make more of a difference than you feeling like you need to be an expert to speak up first.
Fake it till you make it is what I always say.
Yeah.
And then, Noshin, is there a way that people can contact you if they want to kind of connect with you further?
Yeah, for sure. I think LinkedIn will be the best way. If you type in my name, I'm sure you'll find it on LinkedIn. But connecting with me there is probably going to be a lot more effective. Just shoot me a message. I will definitely reply in 2 to 3 days. I'm not the best at replying immediately, but I will get back to you.
Thank you for
And
that.
thank you all for joining.
Yes, of course. If anyone has any last questions, and if Noshin has time to stick around for a couple minutes, then we'll leave some opportunity for that. But thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Noshin, too, for all of your advice and expertise. I always love hearing from you, so thank you for coming again this year. So yeah, if there's any last minute questions, you can go ahead and ask. And if not, we have some closing remarks that are going to be happening on the main stage soon. So feel free to head back over there if you all want to stick around for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Noshin. I appreciate it. If you have time to stick around and see more of the event, then feel free, but I'm sure you're very busy. So thank you so much for joining again. It was so great.
Thank you, Amani. Thanks for reaching out. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.